Mr. President, is the Senate in the quorum call?
We are.
I ask unanimous consent that the call of the quorum be vitiated.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, just last week, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they use the acronym ICE, initiated a precipitous action to reduce the population of illegal aliens detained by the U.S. government for, they said, budgetary reasons. Let me quote ICE spokesperson Gillian Christensen, who stated, and I quote, "As fiscal uncertainty remains over the continuing resolution and the possible sequestration, ICE has reviewed its detained population to ensure detention levels stay within ICE's current budget." So the result was a release of a significant number, higher number than has been reported, of detained illegal immigrants, and blaming it on the sequester's imminent budget cuts last week, when it appears ICE mismanaged its resources, and that's unacceptable. This was an unnecessary action, and it has the potential to put communities at risk. It is ineffective, inefficient, and irresponsible government. And let's be clear about something else that ICE points to as a reason for this action: fiscal uncertainty. Well, that's what has defined our economy over the past 4 years, fiscal uncertainty, because this government can't get its act together in terms of defining for the American people, whether it's businessmen or women, or whether it's homeowners or anyone else in this country that is looking to Washington to get its act together. At least tell them, what does the future look like? And then decisions can be made as to how to adapt to necessary changes or modifications given our dismal fiscal situation, plunging into debt at record rate, borrowing over 40 cents to the dollar. It's unsustainable. But instead of providing a clear path forward in terms of how we will address this, we continue to lurch from cliff to cliff, fiscal calamity to fiscal calamity. What's going to happen? And it's freezing everything in place. And the economy is suffering for it, and more than the economy, Americans are suffering for it. And the 23 million Americans who are either unemployed or underemployed are suffering greatly. Now, sadly, this uncertainty and the budget constraints we face shouldn't catch any department or agency by surprise. This is not good government, but it's the Washington way under this administration and the current Democrat-led Senate. The Department of Homeland Security and ICE have known since September 28, 2012, exactly what level of resources were available for ICE under the current continuing resolution. That is, for those of us who don't understand the jargon that comes out of this place, continuing resolution means a stopgap effort that Congress put in place last September in order to fund this government at the current rate. And that expires March 27th, and we're going to have to do it again for the second 6 months of the year. Instead of putting a budget together, instead of putting something that would give the American people certainty as to how much money we're going to spend, how we're going to spend it, and what effect it would have on the economy. Anyway, ICE has known this since September 28th, as has every agency. The legislation that determines their spending level through March 27th of 2013. So they had plenty of notice. Why then would ICE release detained illegal immigrants a week before the sequester even took place? Why didn't they take proper steps necessary during the 6 months' time they had to evaluate this, to manage their resources in a way that it wouldn't require that someone make the decision that they're going to release hundreds, if not thousands, of illegal immigrants? So in an effort to sort out the facts, I've requested that Secretary Napolitano provide in writing more information and answer several questions regarding the release of these individuals from detention. Question number one: what triggered the ICE instruction to the field to reduce the detainee population by this state? Secondly, what is the total number of detainees released between February 22nd, 2013 and February 25th, a 3-day period of time? How many were released? These numbers have been all over the lot, from the low hundreds to well into the thousands. We need to know how many are illegal immigrants are now floating around out there in the United States, and under what conditions that was made. We need to know how many of these detainees were released solely due to so-called budgetary reasons. How many of the released detainees were designated as criminals? If additional funding can be found first within ICE or DHS for custody operations, will these released individuals be returned to detention? And how will they be rounded up, and how will they be found? We know that law enforcement authorities were not notified of this in Arizona, and it's unlikely to think that all of these individuals, that we know where they are and how they can easily be. I don't think they're going to come back and voluntarily line up and say, oh, I'm back. I knew I shouldn't be wandering around out there. Can you deal with me now? Have instructions been given to field offices to reduce the intake and arrests of illegal aliens into detention? And furthermore, I want to know if the Secretary agrees with the decision to release these individuals, and if not, what's being done to modify this action so it doesn't take place in the future. I'm also concerned that the administration has not taken accountability into this action. Secretary Napolitano distanced herself from the press by saying, and I quote, "Detainee populations and how that is managed back and forth is really handled by career officials in the field." Well, that may be the case, but that's not an appropriate response. Is anyone in this current government willing to take responsibility and say the buck stops here? I am assigned to this position, and therefore I take responsibility for what happens underneath my position. This constantly, well, we didn't know about that, or that's somebody else's obligation, or really, do you expect us to be on top of that? Yes, that's why you're the CEO. That's why for a company. That's why you get paid more than anybody else. That's why you were selected as secretary for an agency or to head up an agency, to take responsibility for what happens underneath you. I was also struck by the Secretary's comments at an event hosted by Politico yesterday, where she talked about the challenges DHS faces because there isn't the opportunity to shift money around. Well, I agree with that, and Republicans agree with that. And on this floor, just last Thursday, Republicans put forward a proposal to allow agencies to do just that. After weeks and months of moaning and groaning by this administration and by its various agency heads about, well, this sequestration is made much more worse. It's stupid. It's a terrible way to do things. I agree, by the way. But we need the flexibility to be able to move money from the less efficient or not needed at this time to the essential, so that we wouldn't have to put out statements like you arrive at the airport 4 hours early because we have to cut the TSA agents at the same level as the least function of this particular government. And so we put that proposal before it, and the president, who had been begging for that, simply said, no, we're not going to do it. Quick change of mind. I think it destroyed his political narrative on that. But that proposal was before this Senate body just last week, to give those agencies the flexibility to take money from one pot that wasn't needed as much, or we could find efficiencies there, and put it over for traffic controllers, transportation security officials, FDA, Department of Agriculture, meat inspectors, wherever the priorities lay. So to complain about not having flexibility when your own president rejected the proposal given by Republicans to allow that to happen, it just boggles your mind. As I've said many times before, and I'll continue to say it, as department heads come before the Appropriations Committee, I've asked them over the past 2 years, do you have an alternative plan in case the money doesn't continue to flow in from the taxpayer at a rate that allows you every year to increase. Do you have an alternative? Because we're running out of money. And wouldn't it be wise to look at how you could run your department more effectively and efficiently, like states have had to do, like cities have had to do, like businesses have had to do, like families have had to do, to make those decisions about separating the essential from the like to do but can't afford to do it right now, from the never should have gotten into that in the first place, or used to work but no longer, it's not a high priority any longer, and manage your department in a way that you can become more effective, do more with less. To date, all the answers that have come back are nope, this is what the administration wants, and this is what we're going to do, and we're going to ask for an increase next year, and we're going to tell the American people that we have to raise their taxes in order to pay for it, or we're just going to continue to borrow and go deeper and deeper into debt. Terrible way to run any organization, whether it's a little league or whether it's the federal government of the United States. No agency can assert with any credibility that it cannot perform its stated mission if it's asked to join the rest of Americans in reducing its budget and making modest cuts. The irony here is that the more the President and the Congress delay action on a bold, long-term fiscal plan with credible spending reforms, the more that all the other programs, agencies, and departments will have to cut back and do more with less. So we're just simply pushing the problem down the road for another day, and each time we push it down the road with short-term fixes or no fixes and don't address the real problems here, we're making it ever harder and ever closer to the point where we have to do it, but do it in a more draconian way. So if the cabinet secretaries want more flexibility with their budgets, I urge them to encourage the President to lead and reform the main problem and address the main problem, which is the runaway mandatory spending that's eating everybody's lunch. So whether you're for paving more roads and fixing more bridges, or whether you're for medical research, or whether you want more money to go into education or any other function that we have control of here in the United States Senate, if you can't address the big donkey or elephant in the room, which is the mandatory runaway spending, there's not going to be enough for anybody left, for whatever your priorities are. And we've all known that for year after year after year, and yet without leadership from the top, this cannot happen. It's been tried many, many times, sometimes with bipartisan efforts, all shot down because we don't have leadership from the White House and from the President of the United States, who is the chief CEO of this country and needs to manage its resources in a more effective way. Only when we do that will we be able to avoid these constant budget showdowns and short-term stopgap measures that don't solve the problem. Mr. President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.